Welcome to patch 1 of the VCV Rack Crash Course series. I'm going to begin by walking through all the modules, mentioning generally what they're doing, and then we're going to go back to each module and go through each one in excruciating detail. So the first up here we have most of the top row, with the exception of the plateau, is the mixer. And then we have plateau that's providing reverb. We have our master clock. We have 3 voices, and GridSeek is providing the sequencing for all 3 voices. The palette is providing the sound source for all 3 voices. We have a manual trigger that we're going to be using to randomize some things, and then we have this pre-wired coming in from the clock. This is just pre-wired going into merge. This is basically providing random values, and then we have CV map that we're using to control the knobs of this palette. The audio 8 for the audio output. We have another trigger that we're going to be using to randomize the notes and gates of each sequence independently. We have Caldol, which is currently turning the knobs, or the smooth random data source that's being used to turn these knobs here. We have merge that we're using to send the information from Caldol into CV map. We have Balaklava, which is our VCA, and it's going to be attenuating the Caldol information to 50%. We have an LFO we're going to be talking about. It's not being used right now, but we're going to talk about it anyway. We have multiples, which is allowing us to have it's allowing this GridSeek sequencer to be reset both by the master clock and by this clock here, which I'll explain how that's working when we get to that in detail. We have merge and poly chances. Right now we're just creating one probability. So this is acting like a single Bernoulli gate, which is a probability gate. So a signal comes in and there's an N% chance that it goes one way or the other. We'll be talking about that in detail. And then we have Corona Blob providing our delay. So I'm going to go into all of the modules in detail. It probably makes sense to let you hear this at a full volume briefly before we go through the detail explanation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fade this down. I'm going to take the dim off so it's going to be louder when I bring it back up. Okay, so I'm going to dim it and then bring it back up again for background music. So I'm going to start going left to right. This is a big module, obviously. It's actually 3 modules. I'm going to start kind of from left to right. Obviously, there's some things connecting in here, so we'll bounce back and forth a little bit, but just to give us a little structure and also so that we don't miss anything. So we do have this meld module here, and if we look at where it's coming from, where the connection is coming from, it's coming from over here. And this says verb. So this is the reverb aux send area of the mixer. And we can also see that if we look at where this is coming from, we can see this is coming from plateau. So this is your return from plateau. Okay, so we're sending in this direction over into meld. And then if we look at where this is going out, we're going into this 9 through 16. So this is a polyphonic cable. You can tell because it's fat. This is thin and this is fat. And so this information being sent through here is coming into the equalizer. Okay, and we can see here that we're on channel 9, and that's channel 9 because we're in the first channel, but we're sending it into the polyphonic input for channels 9 through 16. So this is channel 9, and this is the information, the audio coming in to the EQ. Okay, this 1 through 8 is what's coming in from the mixer here, this portion of the mixer. Okay, and that's these 8 channels here, as opposed to the aux channel that we're bringing in channel 9, and that is connected to the main mixer through this port here. Okay, so here's your output for the channels 1 through 8, and then this is the 9 through 16. So this is going to be where we're sending what's coming in here and getting processed. We're going to send it back over here to this module called unmeld. Okay, and that is we're going to take the first channel out of there and send it into plateau. So if you follow it all the way through, you've got the mixer, but you're going to send through the EQ, then to plateau, and then back into the mixer. Now, coming back through here, we have the channels. And so you can see I've labeled this bass and lead and kick. And you can see that these are coming from the 3 sound sources, the palettes. Okay, you can see the level knobs here and the indicators here. And then we have from here, you can see that this is coming from the balaclava, like I talked about earlier. This knob here, this is the pan knob, and it is being modulated from Caldol. Okay, and we'll explain that in more detail when we come back over here. But that's what is coming. That's what's happening here in the mixer. If we come back over this way, we do have a grouping here that's called tone. So bass and lead, and you can see that there's this grouping called tone here, and you can see these levels are active. And that is because there's a number 1 in here, and a number 1 in here. Okay? And so this group is comprised of the bass and the lead. And so you can do all the things with a group that you can do with an individual. Then we have our main outputs. And so this is what's going over to audio 8 and to our headphones, as you can see here. And then we talked about the reverb send. This is the return. So now we also have a delay, just like the reverb, but this is going directly to the delay. So we're not going through the meld and unmeld process and having anything in front of the delay. So here's your chronoblob delay. So this is the send, and then the return back. And if we move to the right, we can see some settings here. So you can see here that on the lead channel that we are using, we're sending out to the reverb. Okay, so this is following that EQ plateau path, and then we also have quite a bit of delay going out down to and back from the Corona blob. That's what this is. And then we talked about the unmeld, and then of course we have plateau is providing our reverb. Just a few things to point out. We have a pre-delay of 0.011. Not in scope for this discussion, but I just wanted to point that out. And then we have, this is fully wet, so there's no dry signal coming through here because we're mixing the dry in through the mixer. If we were sending a signal directly through plateau and out of plateau, and then into the mixer, we would be able to use the dry wet, or we'd want to be able to use the dry wet to control that mix, but instead we're going to be using the mixer for that. So we have our master clock. We have a pretty fast clock here at 381 beats per minute. And this is going to be what is activating events. It's triggering events. And so we've got it triggering the 3 sequencers, right? And so this is a grid. It's called grid seq, so it's a grid sequencer or a matrix-based sequencer. So you have a 4x4 matrix instead of just a string or a line, a single dimensional sequence of voltages. This is organized in a grid. And so what we're doing here is we are triggering the right direction with every clock pulse. So we're going to be moving this way for every clock pulse, and then every 4th clock pulse we're going to be moving down, and that's going to get us to go through the 16 cells. Okay, and then we have our reset that's connected to the clock here. We have like I mentioned before, we have the triggers, so we have the random gates and random notes here. So if we want to randomize this sequence to change it, we can do that with the trigger. You also have the gate on and off. You can see the cells that have open and closed gates. And then the gate information coming out of GridSeq is going into the trigger of the palette, you can see here, and then the out is going into the poly volt per octave input. With the palette, we're not sending polyphonic information in. So it's essentially volt per octave input here. And then you'll notice that we've got 2 other outputs going on here. We've got this GridSeq voltage coming out of here modulating this palette down here. So let's talk about that when we get there. But that is happening. And then we also have this other inverted output modulating this knob over here on this palette. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get down there. But this inverted output means that, for example, if we're on this cell here in the upper left, the inverted output would be this lower right. Okay, so what it's doing is it's outputting different cells than the main output. Moving on to the palette, this is the bass voice, as we can see here. It's connected to channel 1 of the mixer. And that's just basically it. We have a bass sound coming out of this. And then we have this trigger. It's called 4 manual triggers. And we can use these to randomize, and we'll come back and do that later because I do have a note here that we're going to randomize this patch a little bit, but let's not do that yet. But that's what this is going to be for. We're going to be sending these outputs into these 2 jacks here. But now what we have is we have them coming in from the master clock. So the master clock is activating, sending triggers through here. These are just copies of the triggers coming from the master clock. They're going into, each of these is connected to one of these jacks in the merge module, which is then combining all of those signals through a polyphonic fat cable that's coming into a sample and hold unit that is polyphonic from Bogue Audio. Okay, and then that's not sending that we're going to be sending this out and then into this CV map, but it's not currently, because currently it's connected to the Caldal. So we'll explain that when we get down there. But basically, the CV map is connected to these 3 knobs of this palette here, and so these knobs are moving because they are mapped to the CV map. And the CV map is sending the information to these knobs that it is getting from, ultimately from the Caldal. And that's what CV map does. We have the second GridSeq here. We have a lot going on with this sequence, but we have the usual. We have the direction input coming in from the master clock, just like the first sequence. We have the divided by 4, or the master clock divided by 4, into the down direction input. We have the gates going to the palette, which is the voice. We have the notes, or the voltage, going out into the volt per octave input of the voice. Okay. And then we have, we're using this like we did the first voice to also modulate the bass drum voice down here. That's why you see these two outputs connected to the palette as well. And then we have, we'll talk about this maybe when we get down to here, but we're resetting. We have the reset connected to this multiples. Maybe we just go trace it now. We should trace it now because these are utility modules, so we might as well just trace it now. So we have the reset input of the grid seek. We have it, what we wanted is we wanted to be able to synchronize the entire patch, so that we needed the reset to be able to come from the master clock, which is over here. Okay, and that's what this input is. But we also wanted to be able to reset the grid seek using this divided by 7 clock, which is here. And you can see that this clock is receiving an input from the master clock. And so what this means is that this output is the master clock divided by 7. So it's coming in here too. So what that means is that you can see this now, that it's active, and it is resetting the grid seek every 7th clock pulse. And what that does is it navigates through the grid in a different way, because every 7th master clock pulse, we're going to be resetting this sequence, the sequencer, which is going to be bringing us back up to the upper left. But we're going to be in different areas of, we are moving to the right for every master clock pulse, but this downward direction is only happening every 4th clock pulse. And so since 4 and dividing by 4, dividing by 7, we're going to be kind of starting at a different spot. Sometimes we're going to be right at the division of 4. Sometimes we'll be on the 2nd clock pulse of those 4 pulses, and so on. So what that's going to do is give us variation in this sequence. But they will repeat, I believe, probably every 4th cycle. And then we're also getting some randomization from this, because what this jack does is move in a random direction when this is high or when this is triggered. And so what we're doing here is that's coming from this module down here that's called poly chances. And what this is this is the equivalent of 16 Bernoulli gates. And a Bernoulli gate is a module that will receive a trigger or a pulse, and then determine which direction to send that pulse based on a probability. And so you can see here there's a 95.35% probability that what comes into here is going to go out the B jack, which means that every so often, only every so often, so many master clock pulses, okay, we're going to get something coming out of here that's going to move the next, move into a random direction in this sequence. And so you can see here that this is coming from the master clock, and then we're using a polyphonic connection, but there's only one connection here. So it's just going to be one signal coming into the poly chances, and we're going to get one answer coming out here. You can see it's just this one light here is going to be green or red. So I could have put just a single Bernoulli gate here, but I wanted to go ahead and just include this because it's a good thing to know about. It just doesn't take up much more space than a single Bernoulli gate. And then we have this, we saw this clock, which is just simply a modulate. It's a clock modulator. It's modulating the master clock and giving us a divided by 7. And then we have chronoblob. So we have the inputs coming from the mixer, send, right? And then we have the sync coming from the master clock. And then we have the return going back. And then we have, I've set it for ping pong mode here, you can see here, and then I've set the timing here. And it's fully wet because we're mixing the original and dry signal in the mixer, just like we're doing with the plateau. And then we've set a feedback that sounds good at 75%. Okay. Now that's a lot of talking. Let me let you listen to the patch one more time briefly just to refresh your recollection before we go into doing a few other explanations. I'm gonna fade this out, take the dim off and fade it back in. Okay, let's put the dim back on and fade back in. Okay, so there's a couple of things that I want to talk about because I didn't, let's see, oh, you know what? We never got back over to this way because we ended up talking about this fairly complex sequencer. And so we were going through all these controls here, and then we started talking about the chronoblob. We never got back to here. So this is the voice that's being sequenced by this grid sequencer. You can see the inputs, the gate and volt per octave inputs. You can see that we're connected to the mixer here, and then you can see the knobs moving that is being controlled through the CV map and with the input of the CalDAW. That's what's going on with this. And we have our Audio 8 module, and then back down here we have a trigger that we're going to be using. This is to randomize the sequences. We're not going to do that yet. And then we have our kick sequence. And you can see the usual clock. We have the clock reset, the right direction, the down direction every 4th clock pulse, master clock pulse. We are sending the gate out to the voice. And in this case, we're sending the note or voltage out to the accent of the bass drum module. And then you can see that through the knobs, on the knobs, you can see this modulation that's happening. And that is coming from the other sequencers, voltage out, like we pointed out briefly when we were there. And then we're using a maximum amount of CV here. And so you can see what's going on with that. And then you can just see where it's connected to the mixer. Okay, and now I think we've covered all of the modules. I apologize for that. And then, because I decided to go through all these utility modules while we were talking about this. And then what do I want to talk about? Oh, we're going to be doing some randomization, so I'll talk about that when we get here. What else do we want to talk about? What we want to do is we want to talk about, we did cover the divided by 7 technique, that was this. But the Abbey Road reverb I want to cover for a second, because this is somewhat of a universal applicability. And so what's happening, I don't know if I mentioned this or not. I think I talked about how the mixer was all set up, but I don't think I mentioned the Abbey Road. So I did talk about how the meld was coming into here for the plateau because I wanted the equalizer inserted before the plateau in the reverb send return. But I didn't talk about what I was doing here. And it's real simple. What I'm doing is, and you can see the channel 9 here. And so what I'm doing is I'm rolling off the bass and the high frequencies. Okay, so the low frequencies and the high frequencies. And that is a trick that is from Abbey Road Studios. And it makes the reverb on the other side sound better for a number of reasons. But it's just a trick. There's also a input filter on the plateau that you can do some input filtering, and I'm sure a lot of people are using this to get rid of the lower frequencies to keep it from getting muddy. But this is a very specific recommendation around 600 hertz and around 10,000 hertz up here that I want to use. And so that's what's going on with that. It's called the Abbey Road reverb trick. You can Google it for a lot more information on that. Also, just incidentally, you can Google pre-delay for reverb and get a lot more information about pre-delay too, if you're interested in that. Okay, I think we're ready to do some randomization. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to save this file and then save it as something else because I kind of like I like this patch the way it is. So let's go back to full screen and let's do some randomization. So again, I'm going to fade this out, take the dim off, and before I fade it back in, let me explain what I want to do first. The first thing I want to do is use these triggers here to randomize the sequences. So let's do that first. And what I'll do is I'll just do it without talking. And then I'll come back and explain what I'll do next. This first one, let's do the bass first. So now we'll do the lead. And keep in mind that we have a lot of complex stuff going on here. So it'll be interesting to see how things turn out with randomizing it. Okay, so two things. One is I like that. I think that's cool, and so I want to keep it. The second thing is that you will find yourself surprised by how few randomizations you need to perform in order to get really cool stuff. And it's amazing, really, that even within a single voice, that you can find something that cool with the first thing you try, right? But even when you think about putting two voices together and sounding good, it's even more amazing. It's one of the most amazing things about modular synthesis for me personally. So let's keep that, and we might as well mess with the bass while we're at it. Okay, I think that's cool. Let's do a couple more just to be sure. Okay, that's really cool too. Let's keep that one. Um, okay, so what do we want to do now? What we want to do is I want to demonstrate some different ways that we can randomize the voices, right? So that's randomizing the sequences. So, but what about the voices? Well, we're already randomizing the lead, and that's coming from Caldol, which is a smooth random data source, which is moving these knobs, right? And it's super cool. But what if we did something other than that? What if we did a stepped random? Okay, and that's what I want to do next. And so you can see here in the CV map that's controlling these knobs that that's coming from Caldol through this merge module, right, that we talked about before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect that and connect the output from the sample and hold module we talked about, which is getting this random stepped data that's really fast. You can see it. And then we're going to be, these knobs are going to be flying all over the place. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, crazy, right? Let's see what it sounds like. Let's dim this first and then fade it in just in case things go south. Okay, I'm ready to risk it. Let's see what happens. Okay, that's awesome. I like it. And then the other thing I wanted to demonstrate, I think there's only one more, and that's where we can use a trigger instead of the clock to trigger these so that we can keep the same voice but experiment with different voices. So let's do that. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the main clock from here and then connect this trigger to here. Excuse me. And then then you'll see that these knobs aren't moving, but if I click this trigger, they will move. So what I suggest we do is, let me try a dim first. Okay, let's go ahead and go for it. I don't think there's going to be anything too grating. Let's just see what happens here. Take the dim off. Let me solo this so you can hear it a little bit better. Okay. This is very, very low. That's the other thing. On some of these, you'll notice that the levels are really low. So let's just, if we wanted to keep something like this, we would want to adjust the levels. Let's go ahead and let's do that. We'll bring in the mix and then we'll adjust the levels a little bit. I'm going to dim that. So yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought. It's just kind of the whole mix is a little bit quiet. But yeah, so let's listen to that for a second in the mix. Okay. And so I don't think, let's see what else there is. I don't think there's really anything else. And so what we're going to do, I hope this was helpful and you can come back and reference this. I'm going to have the patch in the notes in the description. And so I'll have that by the time you're watching this. And then on the next patch and in future patches, we're going to be doing more complex things. Like, so for example, one of the ones, I don't know if it's going to be the next one, but in a future video, I'm going to be deconstructing GridSeek. In other words, how would we make something like GridSeek uh, without GridSeek? And it's an excellent learning exercise to learn about utilities, randomization, and things like that. And so that's one of the directions that we're going to head. We'll probably also head in directions where we deconstruct some of the things that are also built into Palette. So we have an envelope generator already in here. We have normaled, which we didn't use today, but normaled CV on the knobs that come from the envelope. We have the low pass gate. Um, we're not always going to want to use just the palette. There's going to be other sound sources and other oscillators that we're going to want to use. So we need to be able to use those, and we need to be able to use modules like for things that are in GridSeek too, because we're not always going to use GridSeek. So, we're going to want to have a quantizer. We're going to need an octave. We're going to need to be able to randomize other things and so forth. So, hope you found this a useful video, and I'm looking forward to talking with you on the next one.